drawings and the blueprints for those products. Other industry programs, right now, as recently as 2 months ago, Max, when we were in Hot Springs to the regional meeting, we were met at the door nearly to talk about using inmates in customer service, something that Max started, what, 20 years ago, thereabout. They couldn't believe that we were allowing women to talk to customers on the telephone, to take orders, to process orders. And you know, my simple statement to them was, well, if you're hiring regular staff to do that, you're spending $750,000 a year that you could be expanding with. And that was, I think, part of Max's philosophy for doing that. But it's been a very successful program for us. In Texas and Louisiana are in the implementing stages of that right now. Max was very dedicated, not only to the department, but OCI and his family, and always respected that. And if you visited with him very much, that came out. Always focused. I think that was a big part of Max's daily life. He was, if he wasn't out in the field, he was in the office reading about new technology, better ways to do things, how we could improve production, what products we needed to be adding, what the new trends were. That's what kept us moving forward. We still try to do those things today. And I think lastly, the thing that I'll always remember about Max is how loyal he was to the department and to his people. The nature of our business causes us to encounter things that aren't always desirable, that you have to deal with. I never saw Max Newberry not give full thought to the decision-making process in doing those things, and he always backed his people. He always backed his people. And we all remember that, and we'll always take that with us wherever we go and when we think of Max. And Max, now, you're the man of the hour. They want you to come up and say a few words. It's a pleasure for me to be able to bring you.
I don't know who that fellow they're talking about. I don't recognize him, but I really appreciate the kind remarks. And I just appreciate all you guys coming out for this. All very busy people, and it's just a great honor for me to have you here, share it with me. One usually has to wait till their funeral. My appreciation to Senator Nichols. Appreciate everything you've done, Johnson, Senator Johnson, and Representative Nations for sponsoring the legislation and the governor for signing it. Support of the legislature for this. Certainly want to appreciate Director Jones and all of the DOC people who went out of their way to arrange this ceremony. I know it takes a lot of work to do these things, and I appreciate it very much. I want to recognize my family. I was asked if my grandchildren should come, and I said, by all means, they've got to endure this. This is my daughter Tiffany and her husband Rich, my daughter Stacy and her husband Glenn, and John Howard, a long-term friend of my son Gary, and my wife Brenda. And then back behind them is Trevor and Emily and Connor and Travis and Nathan. And they're a great bunch of kids. And I got to say, in defense of my clothing, I'm a little bit colorblind, and I'm not at all style conscious, as you all know. And I got up before Brenda did, so she couldn't change it. And as I recall, the pay wasn't too good, and that's about all I could afford.
You're sticking to it, aren't you?
You know, an honor like this is bestowed on an individual, but no individual ever earns anything like this by themselves. It's through the efforts of many, many people. And I'm very, very fortunate to have employed a staff that was just full of outstanding people. You know, the old saying, you have 10% of really, really bad people and 10% of really, really good people and the rest fall in the middle. Well, I probably had my share of the 10% really, really bad. I could talk for a couple of hours. But I had more than my 10% of really, really good people. And many of them are still here and making this program grow. And I'm so delighted that so many of them have worked their way up from some of the lowest levels to the upper management of the company. I just won't go into naming their names, except I would like to mention one person in particular that worked for me for some 20-something years and still works for OSI, and that's Al Miller. And Al Miller isn't here today because he's at his mother-in-law's funeral in Vermont. That's where I hired Al from. And Al was always by my side, just could do and would do everything and still continues to do that. So it's people like him, and like I say, I won't go into the rest of them that really made this program run great. You know, I really didn't apply for this job. I worked for General Electric for about 12 years, and my father retired from farming and was retired, and so my brother and I bought the farm, and I wanted to get closer to the farming operation. So I moved my family to Norman and got a job with a Star Manufacturing. Well, we were building this new sophisticated product, and it was costing a lot of money, and the man that owned the company was 80-something years old, and he didn't care for this newfangled thing. And so one day we come to work, and he says, I think I just want every one of you to leave. So everybody from the president on down left. So there I come home, and I tell Brenda about it. She starts to cry. And I said, why are you crying? I'll find another job. Yeah, but we'll have to move. I blurted out, oh, no, we won't move. Well, after a couple of months looking for a job, I began to regret that. I had jobs offered throughout the state, but not in state. But I was applying for every job that I thought I might reasonably be capable of handling. And one day at the end of the December, I get a call from this gentleman. He says, Mr. Newberry, I'm with the Department of Corrections. I thought I hadn't done anything. And he said, you have applied for a job here. I said, you must have the wrong man. No, I've got your resume right here. He said, it's a blind ad you applied through because we didn't think anybody in your background would apply for the job if we had a Department of Corrections. And they were right. I was very much of the mentality working for the private sector that the public sector wasn't the place to work. It just wasn't the place to work. But they wanted me to come in for an interview, and I said, well, okay, I don't have anything else to do. And so they're interviewing me about this, and they're telling me about some great plans they got. And it sounded kind of interesting. All the things that they were talking about doing. And I didn't have a job. I really needed one. I had kids that liked to eat every day. And so I said, well, if you offer me the job, I'll take it. But I got to be honest with you, I probably won't be here in 6 months if I really don't feel like we're going to be able to do anything with it. So you need to know that. So, but they hired me anyway. And I came to work. I remember the call from Gary Parsons. Gary here? Good name. Anyway, Gary was personnel manager at the time, and he called me, and it's just before I was getting ready to go out for New Year's party. And said, Mr. Newberry, he said, we'd like for you to come to work for us. And I said, well, good. When would you like me to start? And he says, tomorrow. And I said, well, that's New Year's Day. Are y'all open on New Year's Day? And he said, no, but we'll pay you. Things were a lot looser back then. So, I show up to work on the 2nd. And the first thing I remember is going into the guy that interviewed me, and I thought he was my boss, but he wasn't. And I found out who my boss was about an hour later. And then I said, well, do I have an office? And Curtis Gilley was walking by at the time. And he said, Curtis, find Max an office. Well, I'm walking with Curtis. And Curtis is the psychologist for the Department of Corrections. And Curtis is shaking his head and says, I don't know why he asked me to find you an office. And he says, I think there's some empty offices upstairs. There isn't much going on up there. This is when the department was just beginning, back in '76, just formed, and we were just hiring people and getting organized. And so I walked upstairs and I finally found this office with a bunch of old debris, actually a steel desk and stacking chair, and it's air conditioned by holding the window. So I said, well, I guess this will have to do it. Sitting down there real proud of myself, I said, here you are, 41 years old, and look where you got me. I asked them where you want me to start, and they said, well, we've got a real problem with the canning plant. We'd like for you to go solve that. Do you know anything about canning? And I said, I haven't the slightest idea about canning. I only know how my mother did. Well, we hired you as the industry director, and I said, yeah, but that's just your immediate problem. I will see what I can do. Well, I drove to Stringtown to look at that, and even though I didn't know anything about canning, I knew enough to know we had big problems. First thing I saw was a brown stain on the wall, and it was a drip from the faucet, full of iron. And I asked them about the treatment of the water. Well, we have the conditioning, the water comes from the pond down here. And we've got this 1915 device that kind of mixes in chemicals. And we got an inmate down there that throws some chlorine in every once in a while. I tasted the first vegetables, and man, I'll tell you, they did have a problem. So, like I say, I didn't know that much about it, so I went to the health department and I said, would you come out and inspect this facility? Because I don't think it's ever been inspected. And they said, no, it really hasn't, because we didn't know it existed. So, Butch was his name, and Butch went around there, and he had a notepad, and he filled up 5 sheets of habit with that. And he's shaking his head. He comes up to him and he said, Max, he said, I got to tell you, if this wasn't a state facility, I'd shut you down this minute. And I said, don't do me any favors. But he wouldn't do it. And so I shut it down. There's just no way it should be operated. And I was very fortunate that all the money was coming in, and we got $500,000 or so, and it wasn't too long before we had it up and running, and I'd hired new management, and things were clicking along. So I decided, you know, we need to go for the big accounts. And I'd gone to OSU, so I said, I'll just contract, I'll get a contract with OSU Food Service. Well, I don't know if you're familiar with OSU Food Service, but they are experts, and they are demanding. And we worked hard. We worked for about 6 months, a year, finally got it just right. And we took samples up there to the lady that made the decision, and she called me a day or two later and said, Mr. Newberry, we love it. This is really, really good. And we want to place an order with you. And so I can see things are really going here. So I called up the plant, told them what we had. So they loaded up the semi. Well, we had a warehouseman that was in that bottom 10%. All the time we're trying to improve the product, we'd set the stuff that didn't quite meet standards back in the back, trying to figure out what to do with it later. Guess what? Yeah. He said, this is a chance to get rid of all this stuff. He loads it all in the semi going to OSU. The lady called me and said, Mr. Newberry, come and get this stuff, and I don't want to hear from you again. She didn't. Oh, well. Someone, just always somebody in the organization doesn't get the word. So. You know, when they asked me, their vision for the industries when they hired me was created by Dr. Benton, who was the first director who really started expanding the industries, or the industries as well as the Department of Corrections. And Dr. Benton had a vision. He created the master plan for DOC, and they hired him to implement it. And part of that vision was to put in satellite